This is not just a murder story. This is a case that shattered families, divided nations, exposed flaws in justice, and turned ordinary students into global headlines. And today on Myth Vault, we are opening the full vault of truth behind the murder of Meredith Kercher, a young British student whose life ended violently in the quiet Italian city of Perugia. A case that pulled the world into years of courtroom drama, media chaos, forensic controversy, and unanswered questions that still disturb people today. In this documentary-style story, we will walk through Meredith's life, her arrival in Italy, the night she was last seen alive, the shocking discovery inside a small bedroom on Via della Pergola, the arrest of Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito, the conviction of Rudy Guede, the trials that overturned each other again and again, and the final ruling that officially closed the case yet left deep scars behind. You will hear how investigators built their theory, why forensic experts later criticized the evidence, how media pressure shaped public opinion, and how justice systems can struggle when truth becomes tangled with assumption. This story is tragic, disturbing, and real, and every detail you are about to hear is documented and verified. If you want long-form stories that go beyond headlines and uncover the full picture behind famous mysteries, subscribe now to Myth Vault, because this channel is where facts defeat rumors and real stories replace myths. Stay with me until the end, because this case does not unfold the way you think it will, and once you hear the full story, you will understand why the murder of Meredith Kercher remains one of the most controversial true crime cases of the modern era. Meredith Susanna Kara Kercher was born on 28 December 1985 in Southwark, South London, and to her family and friends she was known as Mez, a young woman described as warm, intelligent, curious, and full of ambition. Someone who loved languages, culture, and travel, and who believed that the world was something to explore rather than fear. She grew up in 𝐃𝐨𝐿𝐴𝐻𝐿den, South London, and attended the Old Palace School in Croydon, where teachers remembered her as motivated and kind. And from an early age, she showed a deep interest in Italy after a school exchange trip, an experience that left a lasting impression on her and inspired her to return years later, not as a tourist, but as a student eager to immerse herself in a new culture. Meredith went on to study European politics and Italian at the University of Leeds, balancing her studies with part-time work as a barmaid, tour guide, and promotions worker, and even making a small appearance in a music video in 2004. While quietly planning a future where she hoped to work for the European Union or become a journalist. In August 2007, Meredith arrived in Perugia, Italy as part of a student exchange program, stepping into a city of roughly 150,000 people, where more than a quarter of the population consisted of students from across Europe and beyond, a place known for its historic streets, lively nightlife, and international energy. She moved into a 4-bedroom apartment located at Via della Pergola No. 7. A modest house where she shared the first floor with 2 Italian women in their late 20s named Filomena Romanelli and Laura Mazzetti, and a young American exchange student from the University of Washington named Amanda Knox, who would soon become one of the most controversial figures in the case. Meredith moved in on 10 September 2007, while Amanda Knox moved in 10 days later on 20 September, and, by all accounts, Meredith adjusted quickly, calling her mother daily, attending classes in modern history, political theory, and cinema history, and making friends easily among fellow students who later described her as witty, caring, and socially confident. The lower level of the house was occupied by 4 young Italian men, and both Meredith and Amanda were friendly with them, often crossing paths casually in a way that felt normal and safe in a shared student environment, where doors were rarely locked and trust was assumed rather than questioned. In mid-October 2007, Meredith and Amanda attended the Euro Chocolate Festival together, enjoying one of Perugia's most famous events. And just days later, on 25 October, Amanda Knox met Raffaele Sollecito, a 23-year-old computer science student at the University of Perugia, and the two began dating almost immediately. During this same period, Meredith crossed paths with Rudy Guede, a young man who had lived in Perugia since childhood and who drifted between social circles, basketball courts, and temporary homes. A figure who did not stand out at first, but who would soon become central to the tragedy. On the evening of 1 November 2007, All Saints' Day, a public holiday in Italy, the city was quieter than usual. Meredith's Italian flatmates were out of town, the downstairs tenants were away, and Meredith spent the evening having dinner with 3 English women at one of their homes before walking back alone toward Via della Pergola. At around 8:45 in the evening, Meredith parted ways with a friend approximately 500 yards from her apartment unaware that this would be the last confirmed sighting of her alive, a moment that now feels painfully ordinary in contrast to what followed. Meanwhile, Amanda Knox later stated that she spent the night at Raffaele Sollecito's apartment watching a French film, smoking marijuana, and staying inside, a claim that would later be questioned, revised, and dissected repeatedly over years of investigation and trials. The calm of that night, the silence of the holiday, and the sense of safety that surrounded the apartment created a setting where danger was neither expected nor prepared for. And it is within this quiet space that the story shifts from student life to violent crime, from routine to horror, and from anonymity to international infamy. By the morning of November 2, 2007, the world Meredith knew was gone, and the door to her bedroom at Via della Pergola would soon open onto a scene that changed countless lives forever. The morning of November 2, 2007 began quietly in Perugia, but inside the house at Via della Pergola No. 7, a chain of events unfolded that would turn a private tragedy into an international criminal case. According to Amanda Knox, she returned to the apartment that morning after spending the night at Raffaele Sollecito's home, and she immediately noticed that the front door was open, something she later said felt strange but not alarming at first. Inside the apartment, Knox observed drops of blood in the shared bathroom that she used with Meredith Kercher, as well as a bath mat stained with blood. Yet she claimed she assumed Meredith had injured herself accidentally. Knox also found feces left unflushed in the toilet of the second bathroom, used by Filomena Romanelli and Laura Mazzetti, a detail that would later become central to investigators because it suggested the presence of someone unfamiliar with the household. Meredith's bedroom door was closed and locked, and Knox later stated that she believed Meredith was sleeping and did not attempt to open the door at that time. After taking a shower, Knox left the apartment and returned to Raffaele Sollecito's home, later coming back with him to Via della Pergola. When Sollecito entered the apartment, he noticed a broken window in Filomena Romanelli's bedroom, with glass scattered across the floor, and he immediately felt something was wrong. They knocked on Meredith's locked bedroom door, but received no response, and growing concerned, Sollecito called his sister, who was a lieutenant in the Carabinieri, seeking advice on what to do next. She advised him to contact emergency services, and soon police arrived at the scene, although at that point they were not yet aware that a murder had occurred. Filomena Romanelli arrived later after receiving a call from Amanda Knox, and without realizing the seriousness of the situation, she began searching through the apartment, unintentionally disturbing potential evidence. Concern deepened when a neighbor reported finding 2 mobile phones belonging to Meredith Kercher discarded in a nearby garden, a discovery that strongly suggested criminal activity. Despite Romanelli's request for police to force open Meredith's bedroom door, officers initially declined, believing it was unnecessary. Eventually, Romanelli's male friend forced the door open around 1:15 in the afternoon, revealing a scene that instantly changed the investigation from a welfare check to a homicide. Meredith Kercher's body was found lying on the floor of her bedroom, partially covered with a duvet, with visible blood and signs of violence that made it clear she had been attacked. The discovery shocked everyone present, and the apartment was immediately sealed as a crime scene as forensic teams began documenting every detail. An autopsy conducted by forensic pathologist Luca Lalli revealed that Meredith had suffered 16 bruises and 7 cuts, including a fatal wound to the neck. The injuries showed evidence of a violent struggle, with bruising on her face and jaw consistent with a hand being pressed over her mouth and nose to silence her. Additional injuries suggested an attempted sexual assault, and the overall pattern indicated that Meredith had fought back before being killed. As investigators examined the scene, they quickly became convinced that the broken window in Filomena Romanelli's room was staged, arguing that glass lay on top of scattered items rather than beneath them. This conclusion led police to believe the crime was not a burglary gone wrong, but rather an attack carried out by someone who either lived in or was familiar with the house. Attention soon turned to Amanda Knox, who was the only resident confirmed to have been nearby during the night of the murder, and to her new boyfriend Raffaele Sollecito. Investigators began questioning Knox and Sollecito extensively over the next several days, often without legal representation present, and these interrogations would later become one of the most controversial aspects of the case. On November 6, 2007, after hours of questioning, Knox made statements implicating herself and accusing Patrick Lumumba, her employer at a local bar, of committing the murder. Lumumba was arrested and detained, but he was later released after providing a solid alibi that proved he was not at the scene. Knox later recanted her accusation, stating that she had been pressured, confused, and psychologically exhausted during the interrogation process. Meanwhile, forensic analysis began producing results that shifted the direction of the investigation, as fingerprints found at the crime scene were identified as belonging to Rudy Guede, a young man known to have been in the area. Further testing revealed DNA traces connecting Guede to the room where Meredith was killed, including a bloody palm print that placed him directly at the scene. Guede fled Italy shortly after the murder and was later located and arrested in Germany, adding to suspicions surrounding his involvement. Despite this evidence, Italian prosecutors continued to pursue the theory that Meredith's murder involved multiple attackers, maintaining that Knox, 𝐶𝐚, and Guede had acted together. The decision to charge Knox and 𝐶𝐚 alongside Guede ignited intense media attention, transforming the case into a global spectacle. Headlines around the world portrayed Amanda Knox as either a cold-blooded killer or a victim of a flawed investigation, and public opinion quickly became polarized. As the investigation progressed, the focus shifted from the crime itself to the people accused, setting the stage for years of trials, appeals, and legal battles that would challenge the credibility of forensic science and the integrity of judicial systems. By the end of November 2007, what began as a single tragic death had evolved into one of the most complex and controversial criminal cases in modern history, and the truth behind what happened in Meredith Kercher's bedroom was far from settled. As investigators searched for answers, the focus of the case slowly but decisively shifted toward a man whose presence at Via della Pergola could no longer be explained away. Rudy Guede, a young man born in Abidjan, Ivory Coast, on 26 December 1986 who had lived in Perugia since early childhood and who moved through the city on the edges of stability. Guede had been raised largely without consistent parental supervision, relying on teachers, a local priest, and later an adoptive family who eventually asked him to leave their home in mid-2007 due to behavioral problems and lack of responsibility. He drifted between temporary accommodations, social gatherings, and basketball courts, known to some as charming and to others as unpredictable, and police records would later show a pattern of break-ins and confrontations that painted a troubling picture of escalation. Just days before Meredith Kercher was murdered, Guede had been arrested in Milan after breaking into a nursery school, where he was found carrying a large kitchen knife taken from the building, an incident that would later be viewed as a chilling warning sign. On the night of November 1, 2007, Guede claimed he had gone to a friend's home and later to a nightclub where he stayed until early morning, yet witnesses placed him moving through the city during hours critical to the murder timeline. More damaging than inconsistencies in his story was the physical evidence recovered from Meredith's bedroom, where investigators found a bloody palm print on a pillow beneath her body that was conclusively matched to Guede. Forensic testing also identified Guede's genetic material inside the room, placing him at the scene during the violent struggle that ended Meredith's life, evidence that could not be explained by casual contact or secondary transfer. When Guede fled Italy shortly after the murder and was later located in Germany, his actions further fueled suspicion, although he claimed he left because he feared being falsely accused. After extradition to Italy, Guede opted for a fast-track trial, a legal choice that allowed him to be tried separately and more quickly than the other suspects, resulting in fewer public hearings and limited media access. During his trial, Guede told the court that Meredith had invited him to the apartment for a date, that they kissed but did not have sexual relations, and that he left the room to use the bathroom due to sudden stomach pain. He claimed that while in the bathroom he heard Meredith scream, and when he returned he saw a shadowy figure holding a knife, who allegedly fled while making a racist statement, leaving Guede frozen in shock. The court rejected this version of events, noting that it conflicted with the medical findings, the blood evidence, and Guede's own changing statements, particularly his inability to explain why his bloody palm print was found beneath Meredith's body. Guede was convicted in October 2008 of sexual assault and murder and initially sentenced to 30 years in prison, a verdict that established him as the only person definitively placed at the crime scene by physical evidence. Yet even as Guede's guilt was legally confirmed, prosecutors continued to insist that Meredith's murder involved more than one attacker, maintaining that Guede could not have acted alone. This insistence kept Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito firmly entangled in the case, despite the lack of biological traces connecting them to the bedroom or to Meredith's body. As forensic experts later reviewed the evidence, serious concerns emerged regarding contamination, improper collection methods, and overinterpretation of inconclusive findings, particularly in relation to a kitchen knife and a bra clasp. Independent court-appointed experts concluded that no reliable trace of Meredith's genetic material could be confirmed on the alleged murder weapon, and that the clasp containing 𝐂𝐿𝐼𝐻𝑖𝑡𝑜's genetic material showed signs of contamination due to poor handling. These conclusions struck at the heart of the prosecution's theory, which relied heavily on scientific evidence to argue for a group attack, and they introduced reasonable doubt that would later reshape the outcome of the trials. Despite these findings, Knox and 𝐂𝐿𝐼𝐻𝑖𝑡𝑜 were convicted in December 2009, a decision that stunned observers and intensified global debate about justice, bias, and the power of narrative over evidence. The conviction did not end the story, but instead marked the beginning of a long and exhausting legal battle, as appeals courts began re-examining the same evidence that had once seemed conclusive. As Guede began serving his sentence, the question haunting the case was no longer whether he was involved, but whether he was alone, and whether the justice system had allowed assumptions to harden into verdicts before truth was fully understood. By this stage, the murder of Meredith Kercher had become more than a criminal investigation. It had become a symbol of how fragile truth can be when fear, media pressure, and flawed procedures collide. By the time the case reached trial, the murder of Meredith Kercher had already escaped the boundaries of a courtroom and entered the global media arena, where narratives were shaped not only by evidence but by personality, speculation, and cultural misunderstanding. Amanda Knox and 𝐊𝐼𝐻𝑖𝐻𝑖𝑡𝑜 were held in prison as their trial began on January 16, 2009, in the Court of Assizes of Perugia, accused of murdering Meredith alongside Rudy Guede, a charge they both firmly denied from the start. Prosecutors argued that Meredith had been attacked during a violent group encounter, claiming that Knox played an active role in restraining and attacking her, while 𝐂𝐿𝐼𝐻𝑖𝑡𝑜 assisted, and Guede carried out the sexual assault and fatal wound. This theory relied heavily on circumstantial interpretation, selective witness testimony, and forensic items such as a kitchen knife taken from 𝐂𝐿𝐼𝐻𝑖𝑡𝑜's apartment and a metal clasp from Meredith's bra, both of which prosecutors claimed connected the accused to the crime scene. Defense teams challenged this narrative aggressively, arguing that there was no credible biological evidence placing Knox or 𝐂𝐿𝐼𝐻𝑖𝑡𝑜 in Meredith's bedroom during the murder, and that the prosecution's case was built on assumption rather than proof. As testimony unfolded, it became clear that Knox's behavior after the murder had played a powerful role in shaping suspicion, with prosecutors and media outlets portraying her demeanor as strange, cold, or inappropriate, despite the absence of any established psychological profile that could link such behavior to guilt. The trial proceedings were closely followed by international media, particularly in the United States and the United Kingdom, where headlines often focused on Knox's personality, appearance, and private life rather than the forensic complexities of the case. In December 2009, after months of testimony, Knox and 𝐂𝐿𝐼𝐻𝑖𝑡𝑜 were convicted of murder and sentenced to 26 and 25 years in prison respectively, a verdict that shocked observers and deepened divisions over whether justice had been served. Almost immediately, legal experts and forensic specialists began criticizing the trial, pointing to errors in evidence collection, lack of proper chain of custody, and reliance on theories that were not supported by physical proof. An appeal trial began in November 2010, and for the first time, independent experts were appointed by the court to review the contested forensic evidence that had underpinned the original convictions. These experts reported serious flaws in the handling of the knife and the bra clasp, concluding that contamination could not be ruled out and that no reliable trace of Meredith's genetic material could be confirmed on the knife alleged to be the murder weapon. On October 3, 2011, the appeals court acquitted Knox and 𝐂𝐿𝐼𝐻𝑖𝑡𝑜, ruling that the evidence was insufficient and unreliable, a decision that led to Knox's immediate release after nearly 4 years in prison and her return to the United States. However, the case refused to settle, as prosecutors appealed again to the Supreme Court of Cassation, arguing that the acquittal contained logical errors and should be overturned. In 2013, the Supreme Court annulled the acquittal and ordered a new appeal trial, plunging Knox and 𝐂𝐿𝐼𝐻𝑖𝑡𝑜 back into legal uncertainty and reigniting public debate. The reheard trial took place in Florence in 2014, and despite the absence of new incriminating evidence, Knox and 𝐂𝐿𝐼𝐻𝑖𝑡𝑜 were once again convicted, a decision that many observers viewed as deeply troubling. Finally, on March 27, 2015, Italy's Supreme Court of Cassation delivered its definitive ruling, fully exonerating Amanda Knox and 𝐊𝐼𝐻𝑖𝑡𝑜 of Meredith Kercher's murder, and declaring that no further trial should be held. The court cited reasonable doubt, sensational investigative failures, and serious shortcomings in the handling of scientific evidence, effectively dismantling the foundation of the prosecution's case. This ruling brought legal closure to the case, but it did not erase the years lost, the damage done to reputations, or the pain endured by Meredith's family, who were left with the knowledge that only one person had been conclusively convicted for their daughter's murder. The media storm that had surrounded the case began to fade, yet its impact remained, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of narrative-driven justice and the powerful influence of public opinion on legal processes. By the end of the trials, the certainty that once fueled confident accusations had collapsed, replaced by doubt, reflection, and an uneasy recognition that truth is often far more complex than the stories told about it. When the Supreme Court of Cassation of Italy issued its final ruling on March 27, 2015, the legal battle that had stretched across nearly 8 years officially ended. But for everyone touched by the murder of Meredith Kercher, the story did not conclude with a verdict. For Meredith's family, justice was never a simple concept, because no ruling could return their daughter, and no explanation could fully account for the fear and pain she experienced in her final moments. John Kercher and his family continued to speak publicly about Meredith, not as a symbol or a headline, but as a daughter, sister, and friend whose life had promise, warmth, and direction, before it was taken violently in a foreign city she had come to love. In Perugia, the city struggled with its place in the global memory of the case, attempting to move forward while acknowledging the harm done, including the establishment of a scholarship in Meredith's name to support students and preserve her legacy through education rather than scandal. The University of Leeds awarded Meredith her degree posthumously, an act that carried deep emotional meaning and reminded the public that she was first and foremost a student with goals, not merely a victim in a courtroom drama. Rudy Guede, whose conviction for sexual assault and murder remained intact, became the only person legally held responsible for Meredith's death. Yet his later release, under supervised conditions, reignited debate about sentencing, rehabilitation, and whether punishment can ever feel sufficient in cases of such brutality. Years after his release, new legal complaints involving Guede drew attention back to the case and reopened wounds for those who believed that accountability should extend beyond time served. Amanda Knox returned to the United States after her acquittal in 2011 and lived under the weight of public judgment despite her definitive exoneration in 2015, navigating a world where innocence in law did not always translate to acceptance in public opinion. Raffaele Sollecito likewise attempted to rebuild his life, but like Knox, remained permanently linked to the case through media, narratives, books, and ongoing debate that refused to fully let go. The case became a reference point for legal scholars, journalists, and forensic experts who pointed to it as a cautionary example of how investigations can be derailed by confirmation bias, improper evidence handling, and interrogation practices that risk producing false statements. Independent forensic reviews emphasize that scientific evidence must be collected, stored, and interpreted with extreme care because errors do not merely weaken cases but can alter lives forever. The interrogations of Amanda Knox were widely criticized for their length, pressure, and lack of immediate legal protection, raising serious questions about how psychological stress can shape memory, perception, and confession. Media coverage also came under scrutiny, as sensational headlines, cultural stereotypes, and character judgments often replace sober analysis, influencing public opinion long before courts reach their conclusions. The Meredith Kercher case exposed how easily a narrative can overtake evidence, especially when fear, sexuality, and foreignness are woven into a story that sells better than uncertainty. At its heart, this remains a story about a young woman whose curiosity led her abroad, whose kindness made her trusted, and whose life was cut short in a moment of violence she did not deserve. Meredith's memory endures not because of controversy but because of who she was, a student eager to learn, a daughter deeply loved, and a human being whose story demands empathy rather than spectacle. The meaning of justice in this case is layered and uncomfortable, because while a conviction exists, full clarity may never be achieved, and the pain left behind resists neat resolution. What remains is a responsibility to remember Meredith Kercher with dignity, to learn from the failures revealed by her case, and to approach future investigations with restraint, humility, and respect for truth. As time distances the world from the headlines, the lessons remain clear. Justice must be careful, evidence must be respected, and human lives must never be reduced to myths. When the courtroom doors finally closed on the Meredith Kercher case, silence replaced years of noise, but silence did not mean peace, because the story left behind questions that law alone could not answer. Meredith Kercher was a young woman who traveled to another country with curiosity and hope, who trusted the world around her, and who lost her life in a moment of violence that shocked far beyond the walls of her bedroom. Her name became known globally not because of who she was, but because of what happened to her, and this is the tragedy that must never be forgotten. The final rulings confirmed that Rudy Guede was responsible for the murder, while Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito were definitively cleared after years of legal struggle. Yet the emotional cost of those years can never be reversed. Families were broken, lives were paused, and reputations were shaped by suspicion long before truth was fully examined. This case exposed how fragile justice can become when pressure replaces patience, when narrative replaces evidence, and when public opinion moves faster than careful investigation. It reminded the world that forensic science must be handled with discipline, that interrogations must protect human dignity, and that courts must resist the temptation to deliver answers before certainty exists. Above all, it reminded us that behind every true crime story is a real human being whose life deserves respect rather than entertainment. Meredith Kercher deserves to be remembered not as a mystery or a controversy, but as a daughter, a student, and a person whose future mattered. This story is documented through official court decisions of the Supreme Court of Cassation of Italy, trial records from the Court of Assizes of Perugia and Florence, reporting by British Broadcasting Corporation News, The Guardian, The New York Times, Reuters, Associated Press, and Sky News, and investigative works by John Fallain, Candace Dempsey, and Nina Burley, confirming that the events presented are factual, verified, and historically recorded. If you believe stories like this should be told with depth, care, and truth rather than distortion, then MythVault is your place. Subscribe to MythVault now, because this channel exists to protect real stories from becoming myths, to honor victims beyond headlines, and to ensure that truth is never lost in the noise.